Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be checking out the Furious FPV Dock-King. Now, when I first saw this, I was a bit unsure of its purpose, but then I realised that it's a lot more than just a ground station for the True Diversity system. In fact, I think I'm really going to struggle to cover all of its features in a single video. So, if you have a pair of Fat Shark Dominators or Attitude V4s and are already using the True D system, then you might assume that you don't need this product. But it turns out that the Fat Sharks are quite limiting in terms of hardware when it comes to what you can do with diversity. I mean, if you look at the new rapid fire system, for example, the now aging HD3s require a wire to run across to the other side so that it can supply enough power to the module. Now, the Dock-King has its own algorithm in there to compete with the Clearview and rapid fire system, and it takes the heavy load that those other solutions put on the goggles and separates it into this box. And by the way, seeing as this is a copy of the Dominator module bay, they are working on firmware for this to work with all of the other modules out there, such as the Rapid Fire and the LaForge. And of course, if you aren't a Fat Shark user and your goggles have a video in capability, then this docking system gives all the other goggles out there the ability to use the True D diversity system and potentially all of the other ones when the firmware is updated. So, for example, if I don't like the diversity system on the Aomway Commander goggles, I can plug this into it and it works. I've tried it. Of course, it's not as convenient to have a ground station over the modules being directly connected to the goggles, but a problem that we have with them being on the goggles is that when we're doing FPV, it's quite hard to pay attention to what your head's doing. And quite often my antennas will be facing to the ground, and the only reason that I'm getting a picture is because I fly fairly close into myself. And you will find that in a race, people will mostly be using ground stations to combat that. So this is a really small form factor for a ground station compared to all of the other ones out there, and it has a built-in magnet, so it's pretty easy to mount to things, and it has a tripod jack underneath as well if you want to put it on a stand. So it takes a 2 to 4S battery, and they give you a DC to LiPo adapter for it, and it has an on and off button on the side. One thing I did notice is that if you leave the power button turned on and plug the DC connector in, you get a massive spark, so be careful when plugging the battery in. Now, it doesn't seem to have done any damage, but it's quite alarming when you get a huge spark like that. There are two LED strips in the back as well, which show the RSSI strength of each antenna. And then on the other side we have two AV out sockets, which can be used at the same time, and you are given this really nice quality AV lead, which is braided and it's a couple of meters in length. And of course at the front is where the module plugs in, and it comes with a Dominator plate, because if you have the Attitude V4s, for example, then that plate isn't going to fit. You also need version 3.7D installed on your True Diversity module, which I think is a slight downside because version 3.7D does not have the lost model finder. I guess the thinking is that because, you know, it's a more fixed position ground station, you're not going to be moving it to find a lost model. But that does mean that the stock version of 3.7 will not work with the Dock-King, so you have to make sure that that doesn't catch you out. So something that I found really interesting about this product is that it seems like they've done a lot of work to get the hardware to where they want it to be, but there are a lot of features that they have planned that aren't accessible yet. For example, on the top there are two connectors and two mounting brackets, and one is for a planned DVR and monitor, and the other is for HDMI output. So you might be thinking, why would you want HDMI out with a standard definition signal? Well, the answer is that it can be sent to a HDMI split screen system for races, and it can do so while also outputting two AV outputs to your goggles and another device at the same time, which I think is pretty cool because it means that everyone gets to see what you see through your goggles. But at the making of this video, the DVR isn't out yet, and neither is the HDMI adapter, so stay tuned for that. So if we look on the side, there's an Ethernet port, and this is also for future functionality. The idea is to have multi-diversity or multiversity, so you can hook up other Dock-Kings to each other and potentially dot them around locations where you lose line of sight. And I also believe that they're looking at it functioning in conjunction with a diversity module that's already plugged into your goggles, so that might be interesting as well. So with all of these planned future updates, how do you update the Dock-King's firmware when there's no USB port on it? Well, it's actually done via Bluetooth. So there's an iOS app out at the moment, and they're also working on releasing the Android version where you can set up and change all of the settings through Bluetooth, and you should be able to update the firmware through that as well. But it actually has introduced an on-screen display now as well, so it's very similar to the on-screen display of the TrueD menu OLED screen, but you now get it through the goggles. And you access that menu using the mini joystick on the back of the box. So as well as an on-screen display for the settings, they've also added some new features such as an on-screen display overlay for your video feed, and it can tell you things like which antenna is in use and the video frequency that you're on and the voltage of your LiPo that you are using to power up the Dock-King, and all of that can be configured or turned on and off as desired. So, you know, it's a really capable system here. They've also added a lap timer, which isn't to be used too seriously, so it works off the RSSI signal of your copter, and the idea is that you place your copter on the start finish line and then set a RSSI threshold within the settings, with the idea being that when your copter reaches that threshold it will register a new lap. Of course you are reliant on the start finish line being the closest thing to you, otherwise as soon as the RSSI goes over that mark it will register a new lap. But if you are just practicing on your own, then it's a way that you can practice timing your laps without using a load of other gear, and it works pretty well, and you can set the sensitivity settings and play around with that as well. Now, I'm not a racer, so I won't be using this function, but it's an interesting idea nonetheless, because I think a lot of racers are going to be buying into this system rather than casual FPV flyers. And of course we have all of the other TrueD options such as the band scanner and your saved channels and the auto scan. But then we have some Dock-King specific settings such as a auto or PAL and NTSC selector, and you can change your call sign or the LED settings on the back of the device. You can also set up RSSI warnings and battery voltage warnings. As I say, there's really too much to list. You can even have the logo not turn up when you power it on. One thing that I think it could have is an aspect ratio selector, because a lot of the top-end goggles out there don't have an aspect ratio switching option, and I thought, seeing as this is a device that's separate to the goggles, maybe they can implement that. So I've actually put a request in, so let's see if they can manage to implement that. So as it stands, the Dock-King is $88, which for what it does, I think is a really reasonable price. And I do understand that when you put the price of a module on top of that and potentially a DVR, then the price might be out of reach for a lot of people. And I think that's fine, because you still have the option of just using the module in your goggles. So no one's forcing you to get this, and I think it's going to be a really nice option for the seasoned racers out there, and I'm really glad that it exists. So there you go. There is my take on the Furious FPV Dock-King, and I'll link it in the below if you wish to get one. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers. Bye!